Well, have you ever heard anyone say anything like, Jesus is a pagan name, or that it's completely pagan in origin? Because the Spanish pronunciation is also Jesus, well, that sounds kind of like Jesus, which Zeus, as many know, was a Greek god. And more are claiming that Jesus is not the same Messiah as of the New Testament, but rather a false deity, or a false god with a small g, if I may use that term or title. Also believing that it is always a sin to utilize the name Jesus for our Messiah. And these are believers in the Messiah of the New Testament, of course, the Brit Hadashah, as we say in Hebrew. And after the Hebrew name is known, especially, of course, we're held more accountable. So, if anything like that has been stated, is it true? Is anything that I've stated true? What is the origin of the name Jesus? That is a good question. Is it purely, or is it truly pagan in origin? Is Jesus a completely name change? Or I should say, let me rephrase that. Is Jesus a complete name change by the Roman forms of Christianity, or Protestant forms of Christianity, or both? And, well, if we say yes and we're wrong, well, we degrade our credibility regarding the Torah and the New Covenant, the Brit Hadashah, and the writings of the many refer to as the New Testament. And therefore, of course, we could be causing unnecessary offenses if we're wrong, stumbling blocks, and more divisions, which of course is not the unity of the faith. We should be growing in unity of the faith, not going in the opposite direction. So the title of this teaching is The Etymology of Jesus, the name Jesus, from the Hebrew name, and you'll see it spelled in Hebrew in a couple different ways, as well as with the hey, the letter hey in Hebrew as a suffix letter sometimes. But here you have Yeshua, Yehoshua. How did it go from a Jewish Hebrew name, Yeshua, or Yehoshua, or Yahshua, to Jesus? Going from Hebrew, Jewish name, as I said, to the Greek name, let's take a look at that. How could that be if it's not all pagan, if it's not an all false deity origin? Well, much thanks to the Septuagint. We have the Greek translation of the Hebrew Tanakh, many refer to as the Old Testament. And so the Septuagint was completed around 200 BCE. And where we can see how the leading non-biased, as I say non-biased because they weren't biased towards the New Testament or the Messiah of the New Testament, non-biased rabbinic scribes who translated the successor of Moses. Moses is the same Hebrew name directly into English. As we'll see that, as they've even done it today, as Joshua, or we'll say Yehoshua. And that simply is Hebrew for Yah is salvation. And most people today use the title God. God is salvation. But the results are quite different when we're going from ancient Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, to Greek, to Latin, and then to Old English, and then we go to modern English. And that's what I refer to as etymology. And I quote here, the study of the origin of words and the way in which their meanings have changed throughout history. And not just words, but also names, how they can change. And not just in meaning, but also in spelling and in pronunciations. Looking at the interlinear Hebrew Torah, this is the Chumash that I have. It's a book by Rabbinic Judaism that's published. If you want the details on that, to get one for yourself, maybe I'll inject that here with the video editing later. But this is Exodus chapter 17, verse 8, where it talks about Moses, we say Moshe, and Joshua. And you can see the letters there, the Yud, Hey, not the Vav, Hey, but you have the Yud, Hey, Vav, and then you have the Shin and the Ayin, the suffix there, which would be pronounced, could be pronounced different ways depending on the vowels. And of course the vowels didn't exist over 2,000 years ago in the Hebrew writings, but today they put vowels in there and would pronounce it something like Yehoshua, Yahushua, and of course depending on the vowel pronunciation there's a number of different ways to say that in the pronunciation. So let's look at the Septuagint. You can get online and find the Septuagint free online, and going from Greek to English. And this is what I'll show you in a minute here. With the same Hebrew name Joshua that we just saw in Exodus chapter 17, verse 8, Joshua in ancient Greek is transliterated into English differently to sound something like Jesus. And you'll see this, like I said, in the Septuagint, a non-biased source here, because there was no J in ancient Greek or Latin. And there was no letter H sound in ancient Greek as well. So you wouldn't have the Hey in there, the Hebrew letter Hey pronunciation. There was no SH letter sound in ancient Greek either. So it was just the S, like the sigma, as they call it. In Hebrew, we say like the Samech is the Hebrew letter that would sound like S, going instead of the SH, which is sh. And of course, in Hebrew today, the letter Shin, the Shin, can have an S or an SH sound, and they put vowel letters on that in modern Hebrew text today. But nevertheless, going on, there was no Greek letter for the Hebrew letter Ayin in ancient Greek either, so that the suffix letter, the Ayin, is one of the silent letters in Hebrew. Depending on the vowel, you can put a vowel on underneath that. And that's the suffix letter for Joshua in Hebrew, Yehoshua. It's one of the silent letters depending upon the vowel that you would put with that at the end. Otherwise it's silent, unless a vowel is put with it. Now you can Google search for yourself, like I said, free Septuagint online. And go right to Exodus 17:8. This is the first place, I believe, if my memory is right, where the name Joshua is listed in the scriptures. And as a snapshot, I'm going to show you on my next slide here. You'll see the snapshot that I've notice I've put a yellow box around Joshua. The English is on the left side here, a blue box around Moses, so that when we go to these two same exact sections here of verse 9 in Exodus 17, I guess maybe that's a typo, I should put verse 8. But anyway, you see Moses' name in Greek, you see Joshua's. If you take a mental note there, it's like a capital I, an N, as we'd say in English, with a drop down here on the second part of that letter, and it looks like two O's. And the first O has this like baseball cap flap on it, and then the last letter here is like a V, rounded down at the bottom. And the difference down here below is Joshua here, same exact letters, except there's this sigma suffix letter. Looks like almost like an S, like a C with a little squiggle at the bottom, and that's more of a grammar issue, Greek grammar. And so you'll see those two different names in Greek if you're looking at like a Septuagint or even in the New Testament for the name of Jesus as well, as we'll see as we progress here. And going to the Strong's Concordance, it's an easy number to remember there. Strong's Concordance number 2424. And everywhere throughout the whole, you can just go right on down here. I only have the first few here in Matthew, but throughout the whole New Testament is Strong's number 2424 for Jesus. And so here's a little picture I take with my camera, and so you see when you go to the Greek Strong's 2424, you see that same exact Greek name here. The I, it looks like a capital I in English, the N with that drop down, and the two O's, with the first one with a little, like a baseball cap flap on the top right. And then you have the U and the sigma S at the end. The transliteration is Jesus, is how Strong's does it. And notice this, though, right in the Strong's Jesus, it says, example, Jehoshua. And of course, there was no J in Hebrew, as we know. Most of us know that. And interesting, you'd think that the Strongs would put a Y there if they're wanting to do a transliteration. And the reason I make that point is a lot of sacred namers. I've come across more and more sacred namers who utilize the Strongs as the absolute authority in credibility and how to pronounce the holy name. The holy name of the Yud-He Vav-He in Hebrew, as well as the Messiah, Yeshua. And so I've discussed and gathered with people who take that opinion. But a lot of times I'm surprised that people give all credibility to Strong's as if they have all the credibility and authority and inspiration from the Most High on how to pronounce everything accurately. And it's okay to have an opinion and a belief, but to not be too dogmatic and to cause division over something that's based upon purely a Strong's Concordance pronunciation. But anyway, Jehoshua, very similar to what we saw with Yehoshua. We take that J and just slip it into the Yud, the Y sound. And continuing on here, there again, no J in many Romance languages, as we call it. Romance languages are languages that are European, Middle Eastern in some cases, usually referred to as the European languages, like French and some of the Old English and some of the Eastern Spanish. For example, the J sounded like a Y in ancient Hebrew, but not just Hebrew, but Greek, Latin, and Old English. In all these different languages, English, coming from Latin and other languages as well, of the Romance languages, Latin being one of them, of course. And this explains why Jesus sounded like Yesu or Jesus. If you put the sigma at the end, it would be Jesus instead of Yesu. So again, no J in Spanish either, when many of us know that. You live in the United States, a little bit of Spanish, that the J sounds like an H, not a Y, but like we say in Jose. It's spelled with a J, we say Jose, not Josie. And some people say, hey, Josie, Josie Wales, and you know your way to San Josie, or Jose is the way a Spanish person would pronounce it, and would prefer it to be pronounced. So going to the 1611, the original King James Version here. You can find it online, free online. You could just Google search old or 1611 King James Version, free online, and you'll see it here. Just go to Matthew 1 like I did right in the beginning. You find the Messiah's name very quickly, right in verse 1. It's transliterated into English with a I-E-S-U-S, Jesus. That J sounds like a Y, Jesus. And notice Jacob here, I did that too, Yaakov, or we'd say Yaakov. The bet could be a vet in Hebrew, but this is how Old English did it. King James 1611, that's about 400 years ago, just a tad over 400 years ago, there was no J in the English language. Important to know that for the etymology of the name Jesus. And as a second witness here, we have William Tyndale. He was about 80 to 100 years before King James, doing his translating of the New Testament. You can find that free online as well. Just Google search William Tyndale translation free online, something to that effect. Go right to Matthew chapter 1, and he spells it the same way as the original King James, Jesus. And then I put Jacob, it'll be Jacob, and Judas instead of Judas. There's Judas instead of Judas. So you can see there, and not just with Jesus, but anything with the letter J was like an I or sounding like a Y. So let's do a quick etymology breakdown for Jesus here, okay? And Christians like to say, let's give it all up to Jesus. Let's do a breakdown for him too. Let's break it down. In point number 1, Yehoshua, as I mentioned, the Hebrew transliteration in English. If we go to Jehoshua, that would be Hebrew directly into modern English, where you'd use the J instead of the pronunciation of the Yud or Y sound. Joshua would be Hebrew or biblical Hebrew going directly into English, modern English as well. So why would there be a difference? Jehoshua, Joshua, if we're talking about the same person, why would there a little difference there? And I'll explain that in a little while, if you'll be patient with me and stick with us. Here in my point number 4, we see Yeshua. You'll see this a lot of times written as Yeshua in our modern times as a transliteration, or Yahshua, Yah, as we say hallelujah. We sing hallelujah in many different songs. Yah is simply a shorter version of the holy name, the Yud and the Hey put together. But this is a Hebrew transliteration into English, into modern English, of course. Now, Jesus, as we saw earlier, is Greek going into English transliteration. This is going from Greek to English. And then Jesus, very similar, maybe a little bit of a different vowel sound, is simply going from Greek to Latin to Old English transliteration, as we saw in William Tyndale, and we also saw in the King James Version of the online translation. And then we have Jesus. This is Old English going directly into modern English, because the J ends up replacing what is the Y as the letter J comes into the modern English. Over the last 300 plus years, there was no J 400 years ago in the English language, which is why you would see that as you see that in the old William Tyndale translation. If you go to, you can also go to Wycliffe, which was before Tyndale, and he spells it the same way as Tyndale. Of course, he was a little bit before. There was no printing press with Wycliffe, so he's not as popular as Tyndale or King James. So we can see here with the etymology that the name Jesus is not pagan in origin. It's not originally some Greek god or some Greek deity. And not that there's a lot of Greek gods and Greek deities and had all kinds of names. And so we see a lot of names in months names, in calendar names, in Babylonian calendar, Gregorian calendar. And it doesn't mean that everything has that exact origin. Sometimes, a lot of these things do have pagan origins, of course, but not the name of Jesus. We can see that that name is, if the rabbis were to transliterate it and going from ancient biblical Hebrew into Greek, we see it's Jesus. If they were to take that and go into Latin and then into Old English, we would see it into modern English as Jesus as well, that Moses' successor would be Jesus. But they don't. Of course, they go directly from Hebrew to English because they're translating and they're bypassing the Septuagint, and they're just going directly from biblical Hebrew right into modern English, which would be something like Joshua rather than Jesus. But same name origin, and this is to help understand the etymology. So what's the big deal then, Russ? And many people ask this question, what's the big difference then? If it's not pagan in origin, if the origin is not purely pagan or some pagan deity or false god, what is the big deal in using that name? Well, that's a good question. What I usually respond to that question is, well, what name was given to his physical mother? You know, via that faithful angel. Right, that faithful messenger of Elohim. You know, how sentimental is that name? That the actual, wouldn't that be cool to know how to pronounce and know what that name was? You shall give him this name. It's more than just an emotional attachment to the name, but a little sentimental value to that. People from other languages, think about this. People from other languages and cultures often prefer their actual native tongue, their birth name. As we see this with Spanish people and Chinese people and Russians and so forth, and whatever languages and cultures they come to when they come to the United States. Well, often the names will totally change, right? They'll change their name totally for better impressions. Better first impressions, especially, and also so that people can remember their name better while adapting, while these people are merging into a very different culture, different religions even, or languages. In this case, in the United States, languages, as it's more easily, especially going from an Asian language and culture into an English names. And a lot of times people will give me their Asian name if they're from China or Vietnam or Korea. And it's really hard for me to remember or even to pronounce their name. But if they say Sally, oh yeah, Sally, I can remember that, and have an image of who she is. The most important is her character, her faith, what she stands for, what she believes, and whether it be a name. If they take on a name, Brian, rather than something that I can't remember, well, yeah, it is helpful. And we see a lot of times names change quite dramatically, and it's not always a bad thing, is what I propose, because there are diverse languages and cultural names, and that's important to remember. Also, like in Spanish, we have Jose, right? Jose, in English, that would be Joseph, or Joe, if you want to shorten that down a little bit. Hey, Joe, or it's the same as saying Jose. In Hebrew, it's Yosef. You know, so we have Yosef, but if people come from a Hebrew background and you get to know them a little better and you build this relationship with them, they might say, well, yeah, I prefer Yosef than Joseph. You know, if you could call me Yosef, but you don't have to. Or Jose. If you know someone whose name is Jose, they were born with the name Jose, and you call them Joseph, well, yeah, they probably won't hate you or have a problem with it. But as you get to know them, they might want to express that they like their name Jose, and they like the pronunciation of that. It's something that they prefer. But when it comes to ignorance and language, cultural names, you know, I think we can all agree at the end of the day that it should not cause divisions. It should not cause hatreds, unless, of course, there's prejudice. If it does, often there are prejudice that are involved and hostility between things. But to progress here, let's think about the meaning of these names. You know, that can also establish importance or preference, and not just importance, but maybe just preference. For those who are more educated, if you're more intelligent and you study these things a little bit more, well then, as we get more knowledge, more information, we can progress and improve with spiritual maturity. And again, like I said, without prejudices, without any kind of prejudice would be ideal, simply for a more intimate relationship. And we hear that in the churches, oh, do you have a relationship with Jesus? Or how about a relationship with each other? We don't want division, we want unity. And so we can see that there's an importance for tolerance, especially when there's ignorance and a lack of understanding or knowledge or history, or in this case, etymology. So names, meaning of names, what do they mean? What do the names mean? That, as I mentioned, that can give us an emphasis of preference on using somebody's name. The original names can express greater meanings. Well, what if they do? If an original name expresses a greater meaning that do not equate with going into other language, there's a loss of meaning in that name, a loss of something that they would prefer to hold on to if their name means something really special, and then it goes into a language that meaning. So we have Yahshua, as I mentioned, Yah-Shua, or Yeshua. All these three here, and there's more to it, of course, different vowels, different ways to pronounce it out there, you'll find. It all simply means that God is salvation. Yah, our Creator. He is our Savior. Jesus, well, what does that mean? It's more of an emotional name. It's become emotional. People hear it a lot. The more you hear it, the more emotional you might be about it, especially if you hear good messages and good sermons about Jesus and how He loves you and how He loves all of us, and we have amazing grace, and we all need forgiveness, and so there can be emotional attachments to it, but the Hebrew does have a little more meaning to it, and that's why you'll find more and more Christians, more and more believers in this Messiah starting to prefer and put an emphasis. But hopefully this message will help everyone to not go overboard with it and cause division over it either. So I'm trying to help us all reach that right balance here. So let's look at the original name here a little bit more. As you'll see it spelled differently. You'll have the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, Shin, and the Ayin here. That would be Yehoshua, Yahushua versus Yeshua. And so you have the Yud, the Shin, and the Vav. Sometimes the Vav is before the Shin, sometimes it's after the Shin. What's the difference? It's usually a vowel. It's not a hard letter sound. So it would be like an U or an O is the pronunciation of the Vav when it's given the vowel and it takes out the hard sound of it. So, and then sometimes you'll even see a Hey in the suffix. Now, what's the right one? Is there only one right way of pronouncing it or spelling it in the original Hebrew for those who care out there? And we find a lot of dogma out there, so I want to cover this a little bit more thoroughly. Look at this. So we saw even from Exodus chapter 17 and I believe it was verse 9 earlier, at least from the Septuagint. It might be verse 8 in the Christian Bible translations. Sometimes the verses are one or two numbers different, but nevertheless, we see Yehoshua, often transliterated into English. You'll see Yeshua, as I mentioned, spelled a little bit differently. You'll see the Yud, Shin, Vav in the Ayin pronounced as Yahshua, Yeshua. Is one right? Is one wrong? Is the other wrong? How do we know? And what's my opinion on that? Well, we'll get to that here in a little bit. Now, let's look at the holy name. This is the sacred holy name that Rabbinic Judaism says it's forbidden. You should never say it or pronounce it. And, well, there's a lot of scriptures that say that we should call upon that name. And we should know, His holy people will know that name. Now, it doesn't mean we'll pronounce it all the same way, but we should know the name, just like we know who we're talking about, the character, the personality, what the office, and everything that the name represents, of course, is the most important thing about the name. But looking at the Hebrew letters, it's the Yud, Hey, and then the Vav and the Hey. And so the Vav can have a vowel sound, not just a V sound, like a V, like many say Yehovah. Or according to Josephus, I believe, said there was all vowels when he heard the priest saying the name. But nevertheless, we have Yahweh is often pronounced as the vav would be like a W sound, and then there's Yahuwah. You see people saying, "Well, I like Yahuwah because if you put the dalet in there, you have Yehuda." And Yehuda is the door. The Messiah is from the tribe of Yehuda, that's Judah. And that's kind of a nice coinky-dink there, a little coincidence. So you take the dalet out, the door, and he is the door. And so I kind of like Yahuwah as a pronunciation as well. And like I said, there's many out there who say Yehovah, and they'll pronounce the vav with a B sound. And then, of course, there's the Jehovah's Witness. People who don't know Hebrew very well, they say it's the holy name. You got to pronounce it with a J. Well, they got to learn a little more Hebrew. That's not nearly as accurate and possible or probable as the former three that I've mentioned here. And there's many other you'll find out there, many other pronunciations, often transliterated into modern English. Now let's look at the yud. The yud is the Y sound, like I said, so it would be like a y. Or if you put it into modern English, it would be a j. Or people say j, and that's where G. When we say Jesus, that's the j, that's the yud, as modern English, and that can represent our Creator. Just that little thing, that little yud, and even the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis say that's the tiniest letter, but it can be the most important letter in the Hebrew language, or alphabet, I should say, in some ways. That yud is very important. If you leave it out, it can make a huge difference. And so if the yud should be in there in a word or a name, you don't want to take it out. And so that's where in Matthew 5:17 it says, not one yud, and not one letter, not one jot, not one yud, a tittle of the Torah will fail. And so we see the yud there is even very important in the Torah, very important letter, even though it's the tiniest one. Now, if we put the yud and the hey together, those are the first two letters of the holy name, we have Yah. As H, the hey is usually silent unless you put a vowel, and there was no vowels in the text, again, 2,000 years ago and more. So it could be pronounced as Yah, or Yaho, or Yahu, or Yehu, Yaho, Yehu, and you see all these different ways that people will pronounce it. And the first two letters are simply the first two letters of the Yud Hey, Vav Hey here. And so, in case you didn't know, I think it's good to know that that's where these pronunciations come from, and why there's such diversity out there. And so, going from Yehoshua or Yeshua or Yahshua, a lot of times you'll see it transliterated into English. I said, well, let's not get dogmatic about these vowels. Let's put the Y and put a little comma there. And so people can kind of fill that in with whatever pronunciation they want, rather than put an E or an A or an AH. The Y can just kind of be like an abbreviation and let the reader, come to his own conclusion or her own conclusion. But it all simply means Yah is salvation, and that's the big picture. He's our Savior. He brings salvation through the holy name, and that's really the big picture of it all. And before I go to the next slide, I see a couple comments. Let's check them out here. Okay. Patrick's asking, where do we get Hebrew into Greek as Septuagint decided? Well, the Septuagint, I'm not sure if I understand the question right, but I'll just answer that real briefly here. The Septuagint, according to the legend, 70 scribes, 70 of the leading scribes, not just any scribes and translators, but a little over 200 BCE, they decided to translate the whole Tanakh, that's the whole Old Testament, into Greek, because more Jews were losing their native tongue, and Greek was becoming the dominant language. Just like English is a dominant language, and most Jews today, if you go around the world, don't know Hebrew. They know English better than they know Hebrew, so we need to get the Torah and the whole Tanakh into English to at least help them to read the Bible for themselves. And so this is what the Septuagint was all about, because Greek was becoming the dominant language in the Middle East and throughout the Empire of Rome. Everywhere Roman Empire had its influence and control, Greek was a dominant language. Just like if you were in the Soviet Union, when that was still, before it fell, you'd have to learn Russian, even if you're from one of these little countries, states that the native tongue might be Romanian or Arabic or some other language, because there's Muslims and different languages, Romance languages as well within the Soviet Union. But everyone had to learn Russian in the Soviet Union. And so we see this, that Greek was a dominant language 2,000 years ago, and so a lot of Jews knew Aramaic. Most Jews knew Aramaic, and the very highly educated priests knew the more biblical Hebrew. But Greek was the more common language that people could relate to each other if they didn't know Aramaic or the biblical Hebrew, the more educated form of Hebrew. So that's why I'm just using the Septuagint earlier as not to say that this is the only way to say the name Joshua or Yehoshua, but simply this is a non-biased source to show the etymology. And if those rabbis and those scribes were to progress into Latin and into Old English, of course it would become, into modern English, would become Jesus. The successor of Moses, we wouldn't say Joshua, we would say Jesus. But they, the translators bypass the Greek, and they just go right from Hebrew, the Torah, right to English, and it becomes Joshua and not Jesus. But it's simply it's going from different languages as the mediator language, going into English as the end result, as I pointed out earlier in this teaching. So let's progress here. We can answer that more thoroughly. If I didn't answer that thoroughly enough, we'll get to that at the end of this teaching. I'm going to keep going through the slides here in the meantime. So we have names with different spelling, same or similar sounds, same person, I propose, but we see some different meanings, or the meanings can still be the same. And I'll give you some examples. Let's look at some English examples, and this will help us understand that this happens just as there are homonyms in every language. There's some of the concepts are the same going into different languages. Like my name, Russell, or Russell, it could be, you could put one L at the end, two L's, you can pronounce it the same. It could be Russell or Russell. If you're talking about me, you're talking about me, and hopefully you're representing me accurately on who I am, not any false accusations. And or a lot of people like to call me Russ. They shorten it down a little bit and take some of the letters out, but it's still talking about the same person, same character, same reputation. Also, John. There's a lot of Johns out there, and a lot of them like that H in there. The H is silent, and you could say John or John, and that's a shorter version of Jonathan. If you're going from Hebrew to English, it's Yochanan. Going into English would be Jonathan. And they don't sound a lot, but we're talking about the same person if we're focusing on an individual. Emanuela. You can shorten that down. You can put more than one M in there. You can put different letters in there. You can say Emma, or most people, when they spell Emma, they put two M's in there. But in Hebrew, Emma or Ema, it simply means mother. Where Emanuela is a feminine suffix with the A at the end. You could put AH at the end, and it would be the same. Emmanuela, that would be a feminine version that God is with us. Or in the male version, it would be Emmanuel. Or I've known many Emmanuels who like to say, just call me Manny. I like Manny. But talking about the same person, same character, Sarah. Also, Sarah, you could put the H at the end or not, or take the A out and replace that with an E, Sarah. Pronunciation can be exactly the same. Spelling can be a little different. So this is why we'll see a little different with Yeshua or Yahshua. Different pronunciations sometimes, or just simply different spellings with the same pronunciations. Aubrey. We'll look at Aubrey could be spelled in 4 different ways or more and still have the same exact pronunciation. Or if you want to emphasize any vowels more than others, simply talking about the same name, same person. Emily, you can have Emily with an I before the L. Emily, 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 Emily. Well, I don't think many of us would say Emily, but you could still say Emily with an IE at the end, or put two M's and two E's in there. People like to have a little individual difference, so they'll spell things a little differently. Still, it could be talking about the same person, even if it's misspelled. I don't think that person will get too upset, right? If your name is out there and somebody misspells your name. Look at Haley. Wow. There's Haley, 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 Haley. Haley, or Haley, with an L-E-I-G-H, or Haley. You can still pronounce that Haley, or her Haley, or Haley. Well, you know, boy, I think, okay, Russ, you're going too far. Okay, I think I've made my point, right? This is my point is, you know, with the name Yeshua, you see people spelling it differently in Hebrew, spelling it differently in English, pronouncing it even a little bit differently. But if we're talking about the Yeshua of the New Testament, the Mashiach, the Messiah, how you pronounce his name or spell it in its original language, hey, that's great and wonderful. We don't need to cause division or hostility or ruin our credibility by being too dogmatic about how to pronounce things in any exact way or spell things in any exact way. We see some differences floating around, and that's okay, what I propose. So, to bring balance, you know, there's some righteous biblical Hebrews who took on Gentile names. Let's take a look at that. Because people say, well, I don't like Yeshua or Yahshua taking on a Gentile, a Greek name, Jesus. It just doesn't seem right. And why would our Creator ever do a thing like that? Well, he's done that with others. And let's take a look at some. We have Joseph. Like I said, if we're going into English, it's Joseph. His Egyptian name, you can look in the scriptures, it's Zephnath, Pa'anea. And of course, with the vowels, you can pronounce it in different ways. I'm not an expert in ancient Egyptian language, but that's how it's transliterated into English. Who also, here we have, with an Egyptian name, he brings salvation to Hebrews and to Gentiles, not just to his Hebrew people, but to the Gentiles, the Egyptians, as we can say. And we know that we can see he's a type of Messiah, rejected by over 90% of his brothers, right? And he marries a Gentile. His children are half Hebrew, half Gentile. We see all these parallels that the Messiah is going to bring salvation. He's going to bring family together, Jews and Gentiles together as one, eventually. And so Joseph, we can see, you know, he didn't look Jewish anymore. He shaves his beard. He doesn't look like a Hebrew. He looks like an Egyptian, probably had all the makeup on. His brothers did not recognize him. His 10 brothers. Well, even his brother Benjamin didn't recognize him, as well as 11 brothers didn't recognize him. He had to reveal himself. When the time was right, he revealed himself to his brothers. So there's so many parallels. That's why we call him the Messiah ben Joseph, or Yosef, as even the Talmud has some midrash on this suffering servant of Joseph, the Messiah, and before he becomes a king. Very interesting. So we see that our Creator is not like a Gentile phobic when it comes to names, when it comes to ignorant people who don't know better and need to bring salvation to them. Think about the word Moses, right? The great prophet, the prophet Moshe. He takes on, he was given an Egyptian name by the Pharaoh's daughter, right? He says, we will call you Moshe, because I drew you from the Nile. He was drawn, so his name never changed into a Hebrew name that I know of, and the Pharaoh's daughter wouldn't give him a Hebrew name. He might get slaughtered right away, you know, as all the baby boys were getting, dealt with in that way back then. So he takes on an Egyptian name and never takes on a Hebrew name as far as I know. And that's an important point to consider. Why would our Creator do that? And why wouldn't He change His name like He did Jacob? Well, He's got His reasons, and I don't claim that I know all His reasons why, but let's notice that He does. Daniel becomes second in command. He's got all this authority, but he as a slave, when he was taken, had to take on the name Belshazzar. The fact that we don't have the book of Belshazzar is a good point that, well, Daniel had enough authority to say, hey guys, I prefer my Hebrew name, okay? You can call me Belshazzar if you want, if you really like that better, but I prefer Daniel. And so the book of Daniel, now his three friends, of course, weren't second in command. They probably didn't have as much authority or clout as Daniel did. So we see his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They had to take on, and everybody, even today, most people know them as their Babylonian names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Hadassah, a very Babylonian, and even a pagan name, Esther, Ishtar. Wow. Why would our Creator, He's got the power. He didn't have to do it that way. He could have just said, hey, Mordecai could have said, hey, we are not going to compromise. You don't take on any Babylonian names. We're going to be Babylonia-phobic. And we're going to have this phobia against all Babylonian names. And you're never going to take on a name like that. But we see Mordecai, the very righteous one, the beloved one, gives Hadassah some wisdom here to bring salvation and to save the Jewish people through a Babylonian name. Quite the opposite of as most sacred name sincere believers would approach it in our modern times, right? Something to meditate about and consider. Not that I'm putting a little disclaimer out there, not to say that I prefer Gentile names or Babylonian or Egyptian or Greek names, but I think at the same time, I said earlier, I'm trying to reach a balance with holy people and even unholy people, to be patient with them and to bring them along more patiently as our Creator does, and how He works with people to bring them to salvation, understanding their backgrounds and wanting to help bring everyone to salvation. To Hebrews, and like I said, all Gentiles, through Hebrew and Gentile names. He knows the best approach to people and the patience He needs to have with people, and so we have to wonder how is He working today? We got to be careful with our dogma on that. And of course, base our conclusions upon the Holy Scriptures, as we say, the Holy Bible. So it should not be a big surprise that we see salvation coming through Gentile names, even though many of us will prefer the Hebrew names. To bring balance to the force, if I may use that idiom and that phrase that's popular even in Hollywood, is to bring balance to the true force, to the true believers. Balance to the believers. And maybe that's a better title, huh? Should I say balance to the believers? We got a couple B's. We need to have the Beatitudes, right? Not bad attitude. I didn't say bad attitudes. I said Beatitudes. Okay? So, for spiritual growth, for spiritual maturity, for unity and relationship, that word that Christians like to say, of course we need to have relationship. That's a good word with our Messiah and with our Savior, and we all want that, but we must overcome prejudices and any kind of spiritual baggage, if I may use that term, from our religious and ancestral backgrounds. Whatever kind of past and history our ancestors have influenced all of us to one degree or another, especially if we've come from the big camps of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so forth. And as Luke expressed, to continue on this idea of bringing balance to the believers, as Luke expressed in a positive way, very positively, as you can see in the book of Acts. You'll see here. So then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious." He didn't say, hey, you pagans out there, I got something to tell you. His approach was, hey, he found some positive things about them, even though they had a lot of negative things, of course. He had this wisdom of being all things to all people, without compromise, of course, but finding something positive to say and building relationship. He says, "For I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship. I even found an altar with this inscription." And so Paul's using this to his advantage to bring them to the truth. "To the unknown God." Now that's the English translation. Of course, it was in Greek at that time in Athens. It was a Greek name. "To the unknown Theos," whatever the Greek word for unknown is. I didn't look that up and don't have it on my memory right now. Not fluent with Greek, but he says, "Therefore, the one," notice how he says the one, not more than one, "the one whom you worship without knowing him, I proclaim to you." This is Acts chapter 17 and verses 22 through 23. The one that he didn't have a different approach. His first impressions that day was not to give out any Hebrew sacred names, as most people probably would think that he should have, or they would have if they were in his boots or in his sandals at the time. For example, it does not say at the end of verse 23, "And Yahweh I proclaim to you," or Yud-He-Vav-He, Yahuwah, however you feel that the vowels should be pronounced there. Paul didn't have that approach. And he is probably more effective in bearing more good fruits of bringing Gentiles to Torah observance and the Messiah than anybody, especially of his day. Without modern technology that we have, it's amazing what he was able to bring. All the congregations he was able to raise up in the diaspora that were very, very difficult, to convert people to. Kind of like any of us going to a third world country where they've never heard of Torah, never heard of Jesus, never heard of these things. How do you bring people to conversion? Wow, he had a lot of good fruits in that, and he knew how to approach them. And so after conversion, of course, much patience and enough spiritual maturity, what I propose is that, the accuracy comes later. This was Paul's approach. He would bring the accuracy. He could have the wisdom and discernment when they were ready for more, and trying to avoid persecution the best he could. Not that he always was able to. The truth is going to offend, but having the accuracy coming as we go, as should increase throughout human lifespans. And this is why we see our Creator using all these Christian missionaries through Africa, Asia, all these dangerous places to go to, and bearing good fruit, bringing many people to Jesus, and bringing them to grace. These are the things that they need to hear, that he died for us, the salvation, the aspects of the gospel that they're ready for. They're not quite ready for maybe a Jewish Messiah or a Hebrew one, but just to hear that a Messiah that they can all relate to at the time. But the accuracy will come later as the education increases. And this is why we see for hundreds of years our Creator is just so patient. Amazing how much, a lot more patience than I think I ever have for anybody. Patience with the movement, with the faith growing. And in the end times, we're going to see this awakening and this eye-opening experience like we've never seen. And even, signs and wonders probably following as that faith becomes more accurate. And signs and wonders from our true Creator. And so notice Shaul here, Paul, as many people know him. In the book of Acts here, Shaul or Saul, it says long after his conversion, this is long after the Acts 9 road to Damascus, here the author, Luke, writes, then Shaul, or Saul, who's also known or also called Paul, filled with the Holy Spirit. This shows the author's preference of a Hebrew name. Now, if this author preferred the Greek name, he would say, then Paul, who's also known as Saul. We don't see it that way. We see it the other way. The preference of the author, this Jewish author Luke, was that he preferred the Hebrew name. But and as the book of Acts continues, it eventually just becomes Paul. And why? How does it become Paul? Why does it go from a Hebrew to a Greek name for someone who's so positive, so spiritual, so faithful? Well, that causes some people to reject Paul because they can't understand why. Why? Well, let's take a look at this for a little bit more. Why would he take on a Greek name in the first place? That sounds like a compromise, like something that's not wise to do, like Hadassah. Why would she take on a Babylonian name Esther? That just does not sound right to me, or to you, or to a lot of people out there. But, well, it was Roman law at that time that if you were a citizen at birth, a Roman citizen, to be a citizen at birth, you had to take on a Greek name at birth as well. That was the Roman law, according to the research that I had. So Paul's a shorter version of the Greek name. He had this name from birth, and as he progressed in Judaism, of course, he progressed with his Hebrew name. But then what he ends up doing, as we see in the New Testament, that he reverts back to a Greek name. Not that he converted to this name. It wasn't like, okay, now he's converted and he's going to take on a Greek name because he's converted. That's what a lot of Christians conclude. What I propose is the opposite of that in that regard, but that Shaul was a top Pharisee. We've got to remember, he was a top Pharisee in the Sanhedrin who severely persecuted and martyred even believers in Yeshua the Messiah, tortured them even. And those experiences haunted him throughout his conversion, as he says in his epistles. He's not even worthy to be considered an apostle. He's the least of the apostles. And he deserves all the beatings and sufferings he gets because he did those same things to others. And so, but his reputation, his first impressions were not good among the believers because of that background. Many lack trust. They think, oh, he's infiltrating. He's coming in just to turn us in. And he's not really converted. And so with all this difficulty in keeping unity in the faith with those original believers, he needed some kind of a new beginning or better first impressions. And this is why I personally believe with what I see as in the scriptures why his name would go to Paul. And secondly, to be more effective evangelizing outside of Israel. You're going out. So in Israel, he had this reputation of Shaul. Everybody knew him. He was like a household name in Judaism at that time because of his rank and being trained by Gamaliel and being probably a top Talmudim, a disciple of Gamaliel and knowing everything and persecuting. And he said even his vote could have stopped Stephen from being martyred. He had that much clout and that much reputation and authority in the Sanhedrin. But, as he went out of Israel, he was among non-Jews and even some very anti-Semitic areas in the Asia Minor, out in the diaspora. So we can see that there's a lot of good reasons why Shaul would take on the name Paul and revert back to his Greek birth name to be a Greek Roman citizen at birth, a Jewish Roman citizen at birth. He takes on that name. Of course, there was the Maccabean Roman peace treaty at the time, so a lot of Jews were trying to do what they could to make peace with Rome at the time, until of course Yeshua comes along and really stirs the pot and brings out this hornet's nest that really ignited and brought on the later wars because of all the strife and the lack of unity within Judaism, and the world being turned upside down at the time by the Middle East, what was going on there. So as a reminder, and as I'm drawing to this conclusion, I just want to kind of remind us of things to bring balance to the believers. Just remember Joseph, as I mentioned, took on a Greek name, brought salvation not just to Hebrews, but to the Gentile world at that time of the civilized world, if we may put it that way. Moshe, was an Egyptian name, and to as far as we know, was never changed to a Hebrew name. Daniel, at certain times, had to be called Belshazzar, and went by that. And his three friends took on some Babylonian names. And Hadassah taking on a Babylonian name, the Book of Esther. As another reminder, I like the name Joseph. We see Joseph or Joe in English. We see Yosef in Hebrew. So it depends on what you grow up in, what you're born in, and preferences can be based upon that. And we know that Yeshua was born a Jew and born to save not just the Jewish people. So ignorance and language, cultural names should not cause divisions. And that's a big point that I want to emphasize as we understand the etymology of the name Jesus. The meaning, though, however, is important, and it can establish preference in what I consider a preference or an importance. For those who are more educated and come to this knowledge and information like I have and like you have out there, and especially if you've progressed through this, if you didn't know any of this beforehand, now you know. To improve with spiritual maturity, not prejudice, to overcome if there's any prejudice in your heart. You say, I can't say that Hebrew name, Yeshua. I just can't say that, Yahshua. That's the Hebrew, that's Jewish. I'm not a Jew. Well, if you have a hostility toward that, examine yourself a little and ask the Father if there's any prejudice in your heart, expose it, because it sounds, that kind of a reply would sound very, very anti-Semitic in the heart, even though if it's not conscious. It's not consciously known or acknowledged. There's some prejudice there. And it can go the other way too. And now that we come to this knowledge and say, oh, Jesus, that's pagan. That's a pagan deity. That's not the same Messiah of the New Testament. And then we can have an intolerance and cause division and unnecessarily offend and cause divisions and not having the patience that our Creator has had for the last few hundred years. With that name, Jesus, Jesus, being recorded in the New Testament, the Greek manuscripts, simply for more intimate relationships all around with our Creator and each other. Hopefully all this can help promote that and build that with each other as we learn such truth in the final conclusion slide here to help bring balance to the believers. Balance to be careful not to lose credibility by being wrong about the etymology, about the origins of that name. We lose credibility if we're obviously wrong for people who do know Greek and do know etymology. Well, we just lose credibility in the other areas that we are right in if we're wrong. So just be careful about that. There's no need to be Jesus-phobic, as I say it. And look at how I put the word, that greater sign. It looks like a sideways V, right? As in math, like a mathematical symbol. And we don't want to be so Jesus-phobic that we're not going to be saving others with patience. We want to be saving lives spiritually. So there's times when I use the name Jesus, and when we're in a circle that know better, I usually don't use that name. I usually say Yeshua or Yahshua. And if I'm with people who have a strong preference with one or the other, I'll just adapt to it because I know who I'm talking about. I know what he represents, his office, his title, and everything I know about him, basically. Not that I'm infallible or know everything, but I'm learning and I'm growing as I go, and as I hope you're learning and growing as you go. and to not just be stuck where you're at, and to stop learning. I don't want anyone to stop learning and growing in spiritual maturity and knowledge and information, of course, but we don't want to be too puffed up with our knowledge, because he is still used. And I say capital H, capital E here. He has still used that Greek, Latin, English name to save many over the past centuries. Not to mention the many miracles in that name. I've done many miracles when I didn't know his Hebrew name, and so there's been many miracles done in that name Jesus, which is good. But as we understand more and we can build a closer relationship with him, let's be patient and non-condemning with those who still use that name. All right? Lead by example, as in point number 6 I have here, not by condemning the Greek English names too prematurely. Maybe I should throw that in there, prematurely, or just dogmatically, and especially if we're wrong about it. So let's still remain holy. If you know this information, I'm not trying to discourage you from remaining holy or from being holy, being more set apart. I would like everyone to have more intimacy, a more Hebraic intimacy relationship with Yeshua, Yehoshua, or however you best like to pronounce his holy Hebrew name. So I see 3 comments here. Let's go to those 3 comments. Okay, Ryan here says balance to the believers. He likes that. Yeah, I like those B's. It is important, Brian here says, it is important to call someone by their birth name even when you have a personal relationship with them, ? Yeah, I think, depending on who you're talking to, like Jose, I pointed out earlier, a lot of people who are born with the name Jose, well, you can call them Joseph or Joe, but you'll have probably as they get closer in relationship with you, they'll want to tell you, hey, I prefer Jose, especially if it has more meaning than the English or Greek. So it can, and Ryan asks, do you believe Yeshua, Jesus, has an even more sacred name as in Revelation 19:12? Or you can copy and paste Revelation 19:12 into the comments here, but my computer's just too slow with all this video going. I can't even get it to come up on Bible Gateway. 12. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had the name written that no man knows but he himself. Okay, well, to reply to Ryan's question about Revelation 19:12, back in Revelation 3, remember with the Philadelphians, he says that I will write on him my new name. And he says that the Father will give him a new name. And so perhaps what I propose is that the new name we see in Revelation chapter 12, right around verse 11 or 12 or 13, right there where it says that I'll write on the name new to the Philadelphians, I'll write on his name the New Jerusalem, the name of my name and my new name. So Yeshua does say that he's going to be given a new name, and I don't think that name has been revealed yet. I don't think that will be revealed till he returns as the King of Kings, that will be revealed to humanity for the first time. I don't think that, unless we find some evidence in the scriptures of it, but I haven't found any evidence of the scripture that name is going to be reserved for the future. And names always mean things. That's why I think, if we prefer a name that has meaning to it, that's why I prefer Yahshua versus Yeshua, Jesus, is Yeshua or Yahshua has meaning to it. It means that he is salvation. Yah is salvation. And so when he's given a new name, it's going to have meanings, probably something more implying of him being of King of Kings, being ruler and Savior of the earth. It's probably going to be something with that type of a meaning that, like we see that he's called Emmanuel. We see that there's the prophecy that he will be called Emmanuel. That means that Yah is with us. And not that they called him Emmanuel throughout his human lifespan, right? He was usually called Yeshua. He wasn't. And so names, when they mean things, they can be titles that mean things, or they can be actual names. And so titles and names, even with the holy name, we have El Shaddai. Right? That's not the holy name. El is another abbreviation for the Yud He Vav He. El Shaddai, El Gabor, God Almighty. We have Yahweh Rafika, was that God our healer? And so there's titles, but all these titles and all these names should mean something, which leads to the preference of his Hebrew Jewish name does have meaning to it. When it goes into Greek, Latin, English, it doesn't have the same meaning unless you go directly from Hebrew to English. Okay, Patrick says, I also try to use the name that I feel right with my relationship with the Father rather than being fearful of others. However, if knowing they are offended or they ask that I do not use the Hebrew holy name, I would not use it. Yeah, and that's my approach too, Pat. Brother Pat out there, is that's kind of what I'm trying to emphasize through this video teaching, is to have that kind of balance that you just expressed in a nutshell right there by understanding the etymology. And Ryan says, Our Father in heaven, holy be your name. And then he says Yeshua. And Yeshua simply means Yah is salvation. And he is salvation, of course, and absolutely. Okay, so what I would like everybody to take from this message is to still remain faithful. To remain faithful, to be set apart and different. And if you learn the original Hebrew names, when a name means something, that is very important. It has meaning to it. And it's great to have that as a priority and a preference. And by having more intimate, I'd like to encourage a more intimate Hebrew relationship with your Creator, with our Creator, the Almighty. And in relationship with Yeshua, or Yehoshua, or however you like to best pronounce his holy name too.